From the title of this video, you may be under impression that I am just jumping from a fad diet to fad diet, but today I would like to do some introspection work and also look around, like analyze what's happening in the world with respect to the raw meat consumption and discuss what I feel about it. And in general, I would like to discuss the practices that are commonplace in Russia, for example. And I would also like to give you some links to, you'll find links in the description and the comment below of the videos how raw meat is enjoyed around the world in absolutely glamorous cultures as well. How I actually came to thinking about raw meat and why raw veganism experience plays a role there. So first of all, I would like to start from my, again, internal feelings about it and bring up the relationship between raw vegan experience and my interest in raw meat. So first of all, when I switched to raw vegan diet, the main benefit, the main pleasure of eating raw foods is how invigorating, how hydrating, how lively and energetically, just proper those foods feel. If you didn't try that, I don't know if you can really get a feel for it if you have a habit of eating exclusively cooked foods. But a good example, a good exercise would be, for example, to eat raw apple and then eat a baked apple back to back and see how your body responds to each of them, because both are very tasty, very delicious in their own ways, but their subtle effects on the body will be very different. For example, I love raw apples and I would not go out of my way to start cooking apples because I don't like the sensations that I feel after cooked apples. That said, do I avoid them when I'm presented an opportunity to consume cooked apples? No. But again, just as an example, my preference will be for raw apple because again of this hydrating, invigorating property. Even if we remove all discussions about health effects, about chemistry of things, which again, thermal destruction of nutrients is a thing, it's a very real thing. And if you start reading, you will notice that there's a handful of nutrients that get destroyed upon thermal treatment. That aside, I'm only talking about my preference. Raw is something that I will always prefer. It's just weird, I don't know. And so, having experience with both, I am very certain, I'm very set on my preference preferring raw over cooked for most foods. Given that I am on an animal-based diet, I do not eat almost any grains. If I have grains in my household from other members of my household, I sometimes sample them, but I can't eat a lot of them. Again, I don't like this sluggish feeling. I don't like this stuffy feeling. It's just not pleasant for me. I do eat predominantly animal products, eggs, some dairy, and meat. And I also eat fruits and greens. So this is my diet. This is what my diet consists of nowadays. While I can fully enjoy my fruits and greens raw, I cannot. I have psychological inhibitions to enjoying my meat in an undercooked or non-cooked fashion, even though I got somehow presented with a whole bunch of resources that show me otherwise. And moreover, if you remember my story of how I converted from raw veganism to omnivorism, the first experience when I purchased salmon, I brought it home, I unwrapped it from the paper, and my initial instinct that was coming through all those neocortical resistances and concepts about this salmon, my initial animalistic instinct was to actually just bite into it as it is. I was drawn to this raw flesh. And then when I started also bringing red meat home, I also started noticing that ground meat in the raw form smells super good, super appetizing. Then steak smells and feels very appetizing as well. But there is a strong shield in my psychology that prevents me from actually eating them in this form. Even though raw meat, I know a bunch of Russians and I know a bunch of people who eat raw meat. For them, it's a normal thing, And it's not some extravagant people online, some extravagant influencers, people who are into primal living and such. It's absolutely normal, average people who live in big cities and enjoy very, I guess, cultural life. So I know those people. The raw meat is a part of their diet. So I see this being done. I just cannot allow myself to do it for whatever reason. Moreover, in my family, it's practiced. My stepfather eats raw meat. Moreover, I myself, I eat raw fish. And I have always been eating raw fish. Growing up, I also ate raw salted pork fat. That's another very common thing in Russia. When you take a small slice of rye bread, you rub it with garlic, and you put a whole slab of that salted pork fat, fully raw, and eat it. It's very delicious. Those things were totally normal. Nobody thought anything about them. But suddenly nowadays, it becomes a subculture. I, of course, after I quit raw veganism, I got introduced to bloggers, to influencers that preach carnivorism, who preach any form of like animal-based nutrition, and also some subset also preaches raw meat consumption. Along with philosophies that come with that, embracing the primal living, which I disagree with, and I made a video about it on what's natural, about naturalistic approach to naturalistic in a way of actually like clinging to natural ways, so-called. That is not something that attracts me to raw meat. Again, what attracts me to raw meat is understanding how supple, how hydrating, how, again, just pure and proper it must feel to eat raw meat. Even though, again, I myself, I don't indulge in that much. Again, I eat raw fish. What actually drew me even more to the idea of eating not fully denatured meat, denatured again in the thermal sense, because you can denature proteins through exposure to acid, which will be a totally different thing. Exposure to temperature actually changes chemical and physical structure of proteins in a different fashion compared to acid. So when I say denatured, we will mean thermal denaturalization of proteins and meat. When I started being animal-based, I also, now that I have whole world of animal products to play around with, I started watching chefs. So I found one chef who owns a restaurant in Russia, and he makes short videos with recipes and also showing technology of preparation of certain foods. And actually, after watching him and other chefs, I have been under impression that this high cuisine, this culinary art, is mostly based, like the bulk of it, the body, the core of it, is based on high quality ingredients and specifically technology of preparing those foods. So watching those videos, I started noticing that this guy, for example, he would make a pigeon. His method would be like render fat, and then bring this pigeon to perfect medium doneness. Okay, next video. Make duck. He makes duck, he renders fat, he puts some sauce, he creates some sauce, and he's like, the duck goes to perfect medium in the oven. I'm like, okay, so duck, pigeon will cook to the medium doneness. Okay, interesting. Then, of course, he showed some fish dish, and he took some scraps from that fish that he was cooking, created ceviche out of them. So the cooked fish was served with raw, somewhat appetizer, some salad, whatever. It's very finely diced, kind of like salsa concept, with different like condiments and sauces. So it was like just raw fish on the side of cooked fish. Then, of course, I learned the recipes for steak tartare. And then also, this guy was showing how to make perfect steak. And in that video about perfect steak, he went on to discuss the doneness of meat, because people always give him hard time in the comments about meat doneness, how you should not eat raw meat and stuff like that. So he said that it's actually considered to be one of the worst technological mistakes when you cook meat anywhere over medium doneness. So if you're a student in the culinary school, you will not pass the exam if you overcook the meat. And that also brings me to my grandpa, who is very adamant about meat to be not overcooked. Like, he's a very passionate person and everything must be done well, properly for him. So if you overcook meat, he bursts in a pretty powerful discussion why it is terrible and why it should not be done. He's like, I'm not going to eat this cotton fluff or shoe sole. Different meats react differently to different degrees of exposure to heat. So he would go like burst into this diatribe on the subject of how terrible it is to overcook meat and stuff, and how he's not going to eat it. So this is something that also comes to my mind when I watch all those things, and I feel myself how bad it is to eat overcooked meat. It's just not doing it to me. Yes, there are meats that are very good for the stews. There's no doubt that there are recipes that call for meat to be very well cooked, such as, like, again, stews, some broths and stuff. And of course, poultry, like chicken, which chicken I don't eat anyway. So those things, they are the kind of, yeah, there's common sense to it. But other things, however, like steak, I'm still timid to eat steak that is not near well done. And I don't know, because I watch videos about Parisian dining, for example. And guys just walk around, they show what they eat for lunch, and they go to some good restaurants and they show that they have steak tartare and also medium rare steak or rare steak at the restaurant just for casually for lunch. So it feels like there is some parallel universe that just exists on the other side of the ocean, and that somehow is not normalized and moreover demonized in the United States, as it feels like. Or on the other hand, because it's such a polarizing subject, because it's something so abnormal, some people also blow it up out of proportion, making it so special. Even though, again, in Russia, especially up north, everybody eats raw meat. My family eats raw meat. I myself ate raw meat growing up. There is nothing special about it. Something like prosciutto is also raw, for example. So those things, they kind of create this unnecessary tension and give me a lot of confusion and give me a lot of discomfort. In general, I feel like when some subjects are super polarizing, that's something where you need to sit and do very careful research and literally just trust your own experiences and your own gut feeling. Because there are people who are in panic about literally everything. Like, if we think about, for example, subject of relationships, there will be like, because modern, like in general, like post-Christian model of relationships, I find it to be absolutely neurosis promoting. And so because of that, there are so many coaches, there are so many influencers, there is so much noise about relationships that this is the subject where you need to sit down and figure it out on your own, type of thing. And then everything related to food, there's also such a flood of businesses, such a flood of influencers and people talking about nutrition, so many wars happening around nutrition, that it's also something that you need to sit down and figure out for yourself and stuff like that. So all of those subjects that are very kind of debated, that suffered from a lot of distortions, cultural distortions, they become points of contention. And especially in the cultures where there's no culture anymore, basically. That's where you also lose the culinary tradition, where you lose touch with how it was done throughout history. And people, for example, they start being like shy of certain things that our resourceful ancestors were indulging in. At the same time, I myself, I don't aspire to live ancestrally. It's not something that calls me. It's not something that is my style, basically, because I love human heritage. I love the products of human heritage and advancements. At the same time, when we think about human evolution, then we think about that humans evolved with thermal processing of food, and what if that really played a huge role in human evolution? But then if that was the case, then humans would not be eating raw meat. But literally every culture consumes raw meat, which means that some hybrid mode of preparing food is something natural for us. All of those things, they kind of confuse me and create those barriers on the way of consuming raw animal products. And of course, also living in the US with such level of corruption and control over food, with pretty inferior quality of foods, where when you need to pay so much to be able to access high quality foods, that's another concerning point because yeah, in the US it's not only not normal, it also kind of has a reason to be not normal because it's very difficult to get a hold of high quality animal products. These are my thoughts. And again, just internal impulse to think about it is literally the fact that overcooked foods, I don't like them. I don't like them anymore. And it's just hard to consume them all the time. And I really crave raw, or at least rawer, more raw foods in my diet. But plus, also, just studying human heritage makes me think that it's a totally normal thing. And so many absolutely normal people do this. Normal meaning socially, like socially integrated people, let's say, they still do this, especially of previous generations.